The courtroom was too quiet. No coughs, no whispered questions, no rustle of legal pads or shifting chairs. Just that brutal, suffocating quiet, the kind of silence that came before verdicts, funerals, or public hangings. Captain Elise Mercer sat bolt upright in the defendant's chair, her posture ramrod straight, hands resting gently on the polished oak table in front of her. Her dark hair was braided neatly, tucked into the collar of her pressed dress blues. Her uniform bore no medals, no nameplate, no unit insignia, just a sterile black patch on the right shoulder, a placeholder for something long buried. The prosecutor adjusted his cuffs and stood. "Let the record show," he began, slowly pacing the floor like a predator circling fresh meat, "that the defendant has yet to produce a single document verify her authority on Operation Seraph, nor a single confirmed witness to the so-called Spectre, 12 units she claims to have led." He stopped, dramatically, in front of the jury. "That's because it doesn't exist." Murmurs spread like infection through the gallery. Elise didn't move. Judge Malcolm Rayner looked down from the elevated bench. His lined face was unmoved, but his fingers drummed the edge of the gavel with rising impatience. He was in his 60s, a former Marine turned federal judge, known for breaking junior prosecutors like twigs. But this time, something about this case had clearly worn him thin. "Captain Mercer," he said flatly, "I will ask you one final time. Do you wish to revise your statement, or continue wasting this court's time?" Elise lifted her gaze, slow and deliberate. Her eyes were steel gray, quiet, dead calm. "No, Your Honor, I stand by every word." The prosecutor chuckled, loud enough to be heard. "She stand by fairy tales." Elise turned her head. "Did you say something, Mr. Kendrick?" He smiled thinly. "Just admiring your consistency, Captain. That's all. It's remarkable, really, the confidence with which you lie. It's almost rehearsed." "Mr. Kendrick," the judge warned. But Kendrick leaned in, feeding off the attention. "This isn't war. It's a court of law. You can't just claim secret heroics and expect to be applauded. This isn't a movie. You're not Jason Bourne. You're a decorated liar. A woman with a flair for fiction, but zero evidence. Not one op order. Not one mission brief. Not even a team photo. Either you're a fraud or the government somehow built an elite strike force without a single paper trail and decided to put you in charge." The jury watched her closely, searching her face for any twitch, any flinch. Elise didn't blink. Kendrick kept going, voice rising now. "Your Honor, this is a woman who claims she operated under deep disavowal protocol, who claims she led unsanctioned raids in Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen, who claims her direct commanding officer is conveniently dead, who claims she's a ghost, even though we have ample evidence she was at a forward operating base in Ramstein for the majority of 2021, not in combat as she testified." He held up a stack of printed documents. "Flight logs, base entries, chow hall reports. You weren't in the shadows, Captain Mercer. You were in line for meatloaf on Thursdays." Laughter burst from the gallery. Elise's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. "Order." The judge snapped, slamming the gavel down once. The laughter died. "Mr. Kendrick, I will not have my courtroom turned into a circus." "My apologies, Your Honor," Kendrick said, turning to the bench. "But we are being asked to swallow the extraordinary without the benefit of even the ordinary. There is no clearance, no unit designation, not even a handler on record. The Department of Defense has no file on Spectre 12. If this unit existed, if this woman was who she says she is, why has every record of her service above TSSCI clearance been erased?" He paused, then turned to face Elise again. "Unless it never existed at all." A second, colder silence settled into the room, the kind that didn't follow laughter, but disbelief. Elise looked at her attorney, a wiry, overwhelmed JAG lieutenant named Davis, barely out of law school. He had refused to look at her since the trial began. He now studied the wood grain of his desk like it contained a better strategy. The judge leaned forward. "Captain Mercer," he said, his voice low now, almost tired, "I am giving you one last opportunity. If you tell this court that you fabricated the Spectre, 12 narrative. If you admit that the reports you filed under that code name are fiction, I can recommend leniency. You've served. You've paid dues. There's no need to go down with a lie. The courtroom was motionless, every eye fixed on her, and Elise slowly stood. She didn't speak right away. She didn't need to. Her uniform said enough. She was a paradox. Too pristine for disgrace. Too cold for innocence. I am not asking this court to believe in ghosts, she began, her voice even unwavering. I am asking it to acknowledge the possibility that some things were buried on purpose, that the most valuable operations are the ones never meant to be remembered. Kendrick smirked. Poetic. I suppose next you'll tell us you didn't log your kills because bullets don't need receipts. A few snickers again. Elise leaned forward slightly. You mock what you don't understand, Mr. Kendrick. I logged every kill. Just not in systems you've ever seen. That landed, but the moment passed too quickly. The judge sighed and looked down at his notes. Without corroborating evidence or a verified witness, Captain Mercer, I have no choice but to proceed to sentencing. Your story lacks. I know who she is. The voice was soft, fragile, but loud enough to cut through the courtroom like a blade. Heads turned. A woman in the gallery stood, her hand shaking as it gripped the wooden rail. She wore a headscarf. Her skin was burned down the side of her neck. One eye was covered in a white contact lens, scarred blind. Her accent was thick, but the English was clear. I know this woman, she said louder. She pulled me from rubble in Aleppo. My name is Hannah Nassiri. My brother was with the children. She got them out. 12 of them. I watched her kill 4 men alone. She was bleeding, but she didn't stop. She got us out. The bailiff moved toward her, unsure whether to intervene. Hannah locked eyes with Elise. I told the Americans before. No one listened. No one cared. They said she was a myth. But she is not a myth. She is a shadow. She is Widow 7. The courtroom exploded. Reporters scrambled for notepads. Phones clicked. The judge barked for order. The prosecutor was shouting something. Objection? Fabrication? But Elise didn't move. She stood still in her uniform, face unreadable, as Hannah wept openly, gripping the edge of the bench like a life raft. The judge leaned back, eyes suddenly glassy with unease. He looked again at Elise, and for the first time since she entered the courtroom, she saw something behind that stern expression. Doubt. If you are enjoying this story, please subscribe to support the channel. The judge called for a recess. The gavel came down hard, but the murmur in the courtroom refused to die. Hannah Nassiri stood trembling between 2 bailiffs, her face pale and streaked with tears. One of them was gently trying to lead her out of the courtroom, but she clung to the bench as if terrified that leaving it would somehow erase what she just dared to say. Across the aisle, the prosecution team had collapsed into a frantic huddle, heads bent low, whispering in clipped, panicked bursts. Assistant U.S. Attorney Kendrick stood motionless, eyes locked on Elise Mercer. For the first time, there was no smirk on his face, just cold, stunned calculation. Elise sat back down, her hands folded tightly in her lap, still silent, still composed. But a vein pulsed just beneath her jawline, the only visible sign of the fire quietly igniting within her. Her court-appointed attorney, Lieutenant Davis, finally looked at her. I didn't know they were going to bring a witness, he stammered. They didn't, Elise said. Davis blinked. You mean? She came on her own. He swallowed hard. Do you know what she just did to this case? Elise didn't respond. Her eyes were locked on Hannah, who was now seated near the back again, shielded by a sympathetic deputy. A translator had arrived, speaking quietly into her ear. She kept looking at Elise like a child trying to find her mother in a storm. 30 minutes later, recess ends. The gavel banged again. The court reconvened. The energy had changed. No longer smug. No longer predictable. Now it was electric, charged with uncertainty. The judge adjusted his glasses. His tone had shifted too, from hardened skepticism to uneasy caution. Ms. Nassiri, he said, addressing the witness stand now filled by the scar woman, you've testified that you encountered the defendant, Captain Elise Mercer, during a 2021 event in Aleppo. Hannah nodded, eyes shimmering. Yes, I remember. She carried 2 children out of a collapsed building. My brother was trapped inside. She went back. She should have died, but she came out with him. I didn't know her name, but the fighters called her something in code. Widow. Widow 7. Did she identify herself by rank? Did she tell you her mission? No, Hannah said. She didn't say anything, but she had a weapon none of the others had. It was quiet, black, custom. She didn't speak Arabic, but her eyes, they told us to trust her. The judge nodded, his voice softer now. You're certain it was this woman? Hannah looked directly at Elise. I would never forget her. Kendrick strikes back. Prosecutor Kendrick rose slowly, recovering some of his usual swagger. He approached the stand with deliberate steps. Ms. Nasiri, he began, how long ago did this event take place? For years. For years. And you've had how many surgeries since then? 6, Hannah said. You were rescued during a traumatic experience. By someone you saw for, 10 minutes? No, Hannah said quickly. She stayed with us through the night. We hid in a water tunnel. She kept us quiet while they searched. She kept the gun on the entrance all night. Kendrick smirked, then turned to the jury. We are being asked to believe, ladies and gentlemen, that this woman, this witness, after years of trauma, displacement, and surgeries, remembers a silent American soldier with no name, no insignia, and no record, all from a single night, for years ago. He turned back to Hannah, voice sharpened. Ms. Nasiri, were you ever coached to make this identification? No. Did anyone from the defense reach out to you? No. Isn't it true you've applied for U.S. asylum 3 times and been denied? Hannah stiffened. Yes. And is it also true that your latest appeal was submitted this month? Hannah hesitated, then answered, yes. Kendrick turned back to the jury. There it is. A motive, leverage, desperation. This is not a credible witness. This is a woman fighting deportation, willing to say anything to make herself useful. Hannah broke. She covered her face and sobbed. I didn't lie, she saved my life. The courtroom held its breath. Judge Rayner finally spoke. Enough. Witness may step down. Back in the holding room. Later, Elise sat in a cold consultation room, behind the courtroom. She stared at her hands, the bare white wall, and the flickering security camera in the corner. Lieutenant Davis was pacing. I'm not even sure how to proceed, he said. The rules of evidence. We could call for a recess until we verify Hannah's statements, but Kendrick's already filed a motion to have her testimony stricken based on asylum bias. And he might succeed. She wasn't lying. Elise said flatly, I don't think she was either. But the rules don't care what we think. He paused. Look, I need you to be honest with me now. Off the record. Is Spectre 12 real? Elise looked up at him. Do you want the answer that gets you promoted, or the one that keeps you alive? He froze. She leaned forward slightly. There are places in the world where law and command mean nothing, where the mission changes every 5 minutes, and your clearance won't protect you. I lived there. I built things there. Not everything we do ends up in a PowerPoint briefing. Some of it lives in whispers, scars, and names spoken by people who never should have known we existed. Davis sat down slowly. That's not a yes. It's not a no. The judge's chambers, that evening. Judge Rayner sat in his chambers, robe off, reading glasses perched low. Before him lay a single manila envelope. It had arrived via courier with no sender. Inside was a redacted field report marked, Operation Seraph. Unconfirmed loss of contact. Subject, Widow 7. A sticky note on top simply read, She's not the one on trial. His phone buzzed. He picked up. Rayner. A voice spoke, filtered through a digital modulator. If you want to know who she is, ask what happened to Colonel Briggs. The line went dead. The system cracks. The next morning, headlines were already swirling. Witness identifies disavowed soldier. Is Widow 7 real? Fraud or fall guy? Military trial sparks national debate. Twitter was ablaze. Former veterans began posting cryptic messages. We never spoke her name, but I saw what she did. She saved people who were already written off. That's all I'll say. I know Widow 7. I owe her my life. One post went viral, an image of a worn black patch, with no insignia, captioned, "Ghosts bleed too. Kendrick rattles the cage." The courtroom was more tense now. Kendrick was different, more aggressive, more hostile. Desperation clung to him like cologne. He called a new witness, Brigadier General Alton Rice. Rice, a stoic, high-ranking Pentagon official, took the stand with cool authority. His testimony was brutal and clinical. There is no record of Spectre 12. No code name Widow 7. Captain Mercer was stationed at Ramstein Air Base for most of 2021. She did not receive orders for covert operations. If she acted beyond her scope, it was unauthorized. When cross-examined, Davis asked if Rice had direct knowledge of all covert operations during that year. "No," Rice admitted. "But if such a program existed, I would have known." Elise finally spoke up from the defense table, her voice echoing across the courtroom. "Would you have known about Obsidian Mirror?" Rice stiffened. Dead silence. "Obsidian Mirror," Elise repeated, calmly. "You wouldn't have known, because your clearance didn't reach that far. No one's did. That was the point." The judge raised a brow. "Obsidian Mirror? Explain." Kendrick objected. The judge overruled him. Elise stood. "You want to know why there are no records, Your Honor? Because they made sure of it. We were erased before we even deployed. And when Colonel Briggs died," she looked at Rice, "someone made sure the files went with him." Rice swallowed hard. The judge leaned forward. "And where are those files now, Captain Mercer?" Elise met his gaze evenly. "Buried, but not gone." It began with the boots, caked in mud and blood, one sole partially torn from the heel, black fabric worn soft by desert sand and sweat. The pair sat on a dusty shelf in Elise's closet for years, never polished, never binned, just resting there, quiet reminders of a life not written in ink. She saw them in her dreams sometimes, always in the same way, dangling from her fingers, held loosely as she knelt beside the body of a fallen soldier, his face already gone pale, the warmth fading too fast. But here, in the cold, sterile courtroom, there were no boots, just the judge, the prosecutor, the polished tables, and the sound of a ceiling vent humming too loud, the trigger inside Elise's mind. Kendrick had said something during General Rice's testimony, something condescending, smug, irrelevant, but it triggered the memory. "You've got a flair for drama, Captain. That much is obvious." He said it with the same cadence, the same tone, as Colonel Briggs had during her first Spectre 12 briefing. "You've got a flair for drama, Mercer. That much is obvious." Only then it had been said with a grin, not derision. Her knuckles tightened on the table. "Don't go back there," she told herself. Not now, but it was too late. Flashback, 3 years earlier, black site briefing room. Colonel Briggs was leaning over a table littered with topographical maps and satellite prints. The room had no windows, no clocks, no nameplates on the doors. Just a single flickering overhead light and 2 Marines guarding the entrance, their name tags removed. Briggs looked up when Elise entered. "Captain Mercer," he said, nodding toward the seat. "Welcome to the dark side." She sat. No questions, no hesitation. The file folder he handed her was thinner than expected, but heavy with implication. Operation, Seraph. Unit code, S-12 Spectre 12. Mission, unsanctioned interventions / intel reclamation. Directive, deniable actions, maximum disavowal. Status, active shadow. "This is off the books," he said. "There will be no record. Not here. Not in Langley. Not in CENTCOM. You will not be protected. If you are caught, killed, disavowed, we will bury you twice. Once in reality, once in narrative." Elise flipped to the next page. 5 names, all crossed out. Only hers wasn't. "I'm the last one in. You're the anchor. You don't get to break. You don't get to bleed. And if I do," Briggs met her eyes. "You won't." Courtroom, present. The judge's voice snapped her out of it. "Captain Mercer," he said carefully, "do you have any physical evidence, Logs, documents, anything at all that could corroborate your claims about Spectre 12's existence? No, she answered. Kendrick scoffed, loud enough for the room to hear. But I remember every mission, Elise said calmly. Every name, every call sign, every mistake. I remember what they erased. Judge Rayner leaned back, studying her. His fingers tapped rhythmically, an old habit of his. Elise had counted them. 3 taps. Pause. 1. Repeat. Not nerves. Pattern recognition. The kind you learn when you don't trust your own staff. Flashback. Inside the tunnel Aleppo. It smelled like rust and sewage. The kind of deep urban rot that clung to your skin long after the mission was over. Elise held her rifle across her knees, eyes trained on the tunnel entrance, her ears tuned to every echo and rat footstep in the darkness. To her left, a woman sobbed quietly, cradling a boy with a broken arm. On her right, 2 other children clung to each other, wide-eyed and silent. One of them couldn't have been older than 4. Hannah was the only adult who had held eye contact, even in fear, even in disbelief. "Why are you helping us?" she had whispered in Arabic. Elise didn't answer. She couldn't. But after a moment, she had slid her backup sidearm across the floor toward her. "If I go down first," Elise whispered, "shoot whoever follows." Hannah had stared at the weapon as if it were an alien artifact. "But I'm not a soldier." "Tonight," Elise had replied. "You are—" Courtroom, present. Kendrick stood again, this time with new fire in his step. "Your Honor," he began, "the defense continues to offer nothing but dramatics. I move that all mention of Spectre, 12, and Obsidian Mirror be stricken from the record unless the defense can provide verified documentation." The judge hesitated, then looked at Elise. "I agree with the prosecution, Captain Mercer. You're presenting claims without corroboration. At best, they are emotional recollections. At worst—" The courtroom doors opened. A court officer walked quickly to the bench and handed the judge a folder. Unmarked, no insignia. He opened it slowly. His eyes scanned the contents. Silence. He looked up at Elise. Something shifted behind his gaze. "Where did this come from?" he asked the officer. "Anonymous drop. Couriered with authentication codes. Level 5 clearance tags. We verified the packet's signature against archived legacy intel keys." "Legacy?" Kendrick asked, his voice cracking. "Cold War era encryption," the judge said quietly. "Unused for over 20 years. Until now." He turned to Elise. "Would you care to explain what's in here?" She didn't flinch. "No, Your Honor. But I imagine it's everything they thought they destroyed." Flashback, after the firefight near Fallujah. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, from withdrawal. They hadn't slept in 72 hours. Spectre. 12 had just neutralized a rogue cell responsible for trafficking Western hostages through black market routes. They had gone in with 4, come out with 2. Elise had pulled the last body out herself. Sergeant Danes, her comm specialist, 23, red hair, Catholic tattoos. She had known, even before dragging him from the rubble, that the story wouldn't be told. The debrief was in a cave, the burial in silence, a silent nod from Briggs, a hand on her shoulder. Nothing more. No record, no headline, no folded flag, just memory. Courtroom, present. The judge took a breath and held up one of the documents. This report is dated January 9th, 2021. It describes an engagement outside Aleppo involving American special operators. Names are redacted, but it mentions an asset codenamed Widow 7. Witnesses corroborate this. He picked up a photo, grainy, black and white, but unmistakable. Elise, holding a weapon no U.S. soldier was ever issued, covered in soot, standing over a collapsed school building. He handed the photo to Kendrick. The prosecutor looked stunned. His lips moved, but no words came out. "This," the judge said slowly, "is the beginning of a very different trial." Final flashback. Colonel Briggs's last words. The night before he died, Briggs had called Elise into his office. His face was drawn. tired in a way that no amount of sleep would ever fix. "They're going to come after you," he had said quietly. "Why?" "Because you're the last one who remembers. Because you lived. And because you refused to play dumb." He'd handed her a flash drive. "If anything ever happens to me, send us to a judge. Not the Pentagon. Not Langley. A judge." She hadn't asked what was on it. She still hadn't looked. Until yesterday. Courtroom, present. The tension was now a vice grip on the entire room. Even the jury was leaning forward, eyes wide, unsure whether they were watching a trial or the unraveling of a decade-long lie. The judge set the packet down. "Captain Mercer," he said slowly, "this court is entering dangerous territory. If what you say is true, the implications stretch beyond this trial. They already have, Your Honor. Do you have more?" She nodded once. "Then tomorrow," he said, "you will give it to this court." He struck the gavel. Adjourned until morning. 8:59 a.m. The courtroom was half-filled, but the air was already electric. Even before the bailiff called the session to order, you could feel it. The watchers were no longer watching a routine trial. They were leaning in, hungry, suspicious, fascinated. Reporters sat side by side with military brass. 2 FBI agents whispered near the back wall, pretending to be just another pair of observers. And in the defendant's chair sat Captain Elise Mercer, composed, unreadable, her expression etched in quiet defiance. There were no handcuffs this time, no ankle restraint, only the stillness of a soldier who had stared death in the eyes and never blinked. Judge Rayner entered with an air of wariness now. His steps were slower, measured. The man who had once threatened contempt for every deviation from protocol now looked as though he were clinging to the last shreds of control over something far larger than his bench. The gavel came down. "Court is now in session. Captain Mercer," he said, "you indicated yesterday you had additional evidence." Elise stood. She held up a flash drive, matte black, with no visible markings. "This," she said, "was given to me by Colonel Briggs before his death. It contains the final encrypted reports from Operation Seraph and the movement of Spectre 12, including debrief logs, casualty reports, and comms audio from classified zones." The courtroom fell still. She turned toward the judge. "It also contains a video, a message he recorded on the night before he died." Kendrick stood up. "Objection, Your Honor. This was not submitted through discovery. It's unverified and untraceable." Judge Rayner raised an eyebrow. "You object to evidence that might exonerate the defendant and implicate half a dozen agencies?" Kendrick cleared his throat. "I object to hearsay, not justice." The judge gestured to the bailiff. "Secure the drive. Deliver it to the IT specialist. We'll view it in chambers shortly." The bailiff nodded and exited quickly, and that was the moment the courtroom changed. Because just before the bailiff reached the exit, a man stood up in the third row of the gallery. He was tall, with salt and pepper hair, a pressed suit, and a strange, cautious stiffness, like someone enused the crowds. Most people didn't notice him at first, but then he whispered, only one word, and Elise Mercer froze. The whisper, Madrigal, the whisper was barely audible, but Elise heard it like thunder. Her breath caught. Judge Rayner leaned forward. "Captain Mercer, is something wrong?" She turned. Her eyes scanned the gallery and locked on the man. He looked back at her, not smiling, not hostile, just watching. Then he said it again, louder this time. "Madrigal." A chill went through the room. The murmurs began. Kendrick immediately stood. "Who the hell are you?" The man walked slowly to front. "I am Commander Marcus Vell," he said calmly. "Naval Intelligence. Retired. Serial hashtag 6670-841X. He held out an old, worn identification badge, long expired but marked with obsidian clearance. The judge examined it. His eyebrows rose slightly. "I serve under Colonel Briggs," Vell continued. "I was a handler for Spectre, 12 from 2019 through 2021. Kendrick's voice was sharp. "You're not on any roster." "No, I'm not, because the program I ran was designed not to exist." Vell turned to the judge. "May I approach?" Judge Rayner nodded once, Slowly, Commander Vell stepped forward and spoke directly to Elise for the first time in years. We used Madrigal as a last resort passphrase. It meant the mission had been compromised at the highest level, that we were being burned, and only 4 people ever knew that word. His voice cracked, barely. 3 of them are dead. You're the 4th. Courtroom disruption. Gasps spread like a wildfire. Reporters bolted for their phones. The stenographer's fingers hesitated for the first time all morning. Kendrick exploded. Your Honor, this is absurd. We're taking the word of a ghost claiming to work for a program no one can verify. But Elise cut in, asked him the motto. Kendrick sneered. Oh, for God's sake. I said. Elise repeated, now rising to her full height, eyes locked on Vell. What was the motto of Spectre 12? Vell looked her square in the face. Deny the silence, fear the echo. Elise exhaled, slowly. That phrase hadn't been uttered in years. It was a code they'd use in the field to distinguish real allies from imposters when everything else fell apart. It wasn't something found in files. It was something burned into bones. In Chambers viewing, Colonel Briggs's final message. Judge Rayner, Kendrick Davis, Elise, and the IT specialist moved to Chambers. The room was tight, windowless. The lights dimmed as the monitor blinked on. The video began with static. Then a face, Colonel Briggs. He looked older, hollow-eyed, as if he hadn't slept in days. He sat in what appeared to be a concrete bunker, one lamp casting half his face in shadow. If you're seeing this, Briggs said slowly, it means I'm dead, and it means the walls have closed in. He took a breath. Spectre 12 was never supposed to be permanent. We were built to clean up what conventional forces couldn't. Rescue ops, black sites, hostage retrieval. We went into places no politician wanted on the books. Elise Mercer was the best operative I ever worked with. But someone at the top decided our success was a liability. After Aleppo, they pulled my clearance. They started shredding the team's files. They want to blame her for what we did. Don't let them. His voice broke for the first time. Don't let her go down as a traitor for surviving what the rest of us didn't. The screen flickered, then black. No one said anything. Even Kendrick looked pale now. Back in court, control unravels. The judge took the bench again, visibly rattled but composed. Due to verified clearance and corroborated materials presented in Chambers, he announced, this court recognizes Spectre 12 as a legitimate, though disavowed, Special Operations Unit. Charges of unauthorized command will be suspended pending further investigation. Elise remained still, but her chest rose slightly, the first deep breath in days. Kendrick stood again. Your Honor, this changes the scope of the trial. If this unit existed and operated under instruction, then we must expand the indictment to those who approved the missions. The judge leaned forward. Are you suggesting that the Department of Defense conspired to erase its own operatives, Mr. Kendrick? Kendrick faltered. I'm saying we need clarity. But he was losing the room. The real reason. It was Commander Vell who spoke next, uninvited but commanding attention. She was never supposed to testify, he said. That's why they brought the charges. He looked directly at the judge. They knew she wouldn't crack under interrogation, that she wouldn't name names. So they went for character assassination. A court-martial is the perfect cover. It discredits her, buries the story, and keeps the program sealed. Rayner narrowed his eyes. And what names would she have given? Vell hesitated. Then, generals, ambassadors, private security COs. This isn't about a rogue soldier. It's about a program that did its job too well. The judge nodded, slowly, and for the first time, his tone cracked. I'm not just trying a soldier here, am I? No one answered, but the silence was enough. End of the day, Hannah's return. Court was dismissed for the day, but Hannah waited outside the doors. She stood quietly, holding a paper coffee cup, hands trembling. Elise stepped out, flanked by guards, but stopped when she saw her. Hannah looked up. You remember me now? Elise nodded once. You gave me that pistol, Hannah said softly. I didn't use it, but just knowing I had it made me brave. They stood in silence for a beat. Then Hannah reached out, slowly, and pressed something into Elise's palm, a folded piece of cloth. Elise unfolded it, a makeshift flag, stitched from scraps of a child's backpack, the same backpack one of the rescued children had worn in Aleppo. Crude, but recognizable. A thank you that had traveled across continents and years. Elise closed her fingers over it, her eyes suddenly glassy. "I never forgot you," Hannah whispered. And Elise, Widow 7, nodded once, then turned and walked away. By noon the next day, Elise Mercer's name was on every major news channel, not in a celebratory tone. Not yet, but the story had cracked wide open. The once mock defendant, accused of fabrication and delusion, was now the centerpiece of a spiraling conspiracy. The headlines moved quickly, disavowed and buried. The truth about Widow 7, top secret unit Spectre, 12 confirmed by leaked Pentagon footage. From courtroom to cover-up, who tried to silence Captain Mercer? Elise didn't watch the coverage. She never had. Back at the courthouse, the court reconvened under intense security. Metal detectors were doubled. Plainclothes federal agents lingered in corners, eyes sharp, fingers twitching near belt clips. Reporters had to be cleared and seated early. Anonymous threats had started arriving overnight, many of them vague. "Keep your nose out of ghosts," but some specific. A note had been left under the judge's windshield. "Shut this down, or we shut you down." Judge Rayner's chambers. Before the session, the judge sat in his chambers alone, staring at the ceiling. Everything about this case had morphed into something volatile. He had served as a Marine. He'd seen war. He knew what it meant to lose men in secret operations, to be told, "You don't ask about that." He'd always accepted that some truths were kept hidden for national interest. But now, a soldier who'd done the impossible was being systematically destroyed to cover the sins of those who'd sent her. The door opened. His clerk poked her head in. "Sir, there's a visitor. Says she's with Army Legal Command. Has clearance. Brought a letter and a warning." The judge sighed. "Let her in." Enter the insider. The woman who entered was in her 50s, straight-backed, severe, with the bearing of someone who'd chewed nails for breakfast. "Colonel Marissa Hart," she introduced herself. "Internal Legal Counsel, SOCM." She handed him a sealed envelope. Rayner opened it and read quickly. His face tightened. "What exactly is this?" he asked. "An attempt at containment," she said. "You are being advised to dismiss the remaining charges against Captain Mercer on grounds of national security and terminate all further hearings related to Spectre 12. And if I don't, you'll be discredited or buried." He looked up slowly. "Are you threatening me?" Hart folded her hands. "No, Your Honor. I'm advising you. From one patriot to another. This is bigger than you. It's bigger than her. Let it go." He studied her for a long time, then tore the letter in half. "Court starts in 15 minutes. You're welcome to watch." Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere shifts. When Elise entered the courtroom that morning, the room felt different, not hostile, not exactly welcoming, but curious. There were nods now, from the gallery, from enlisted spectators in uniform, even from the bailiff. They didn't know the full story, but they sensed something had been hidden from them, and they were angry about it. Kendrick looked haggard. He had slept in his office and wore a fresh shirt, but the dark circles under his eyes gave him away. He stood when the judge entered, but didn't speak. The gavel dropped. "Proceed," Judge Rayner said simply. Kendrick's last gambit. Kendrick approached the bench with one final card to play. "I'd like to submit new witness testimony from Brigadier General Wilkes," he said. "It will demonstrate that Captain Mercer acted outside her scope of authority and engaged in operations not officially sanctioned by any governing body." Elise said nothing. Her eyes remained fixed ahead. Wilkes entered the courtroom with the swagger of a man who believed the uniform could protect him from truth. His decorations were crisp. His tone was arrogant. Captain Mercer was flagged internally, he said, for disobedience, non-standard operation protocol, and excessive force during field engagements. "Flagged by whom?" the judge asked. Wilkes hesitated. "Internal analysts within Joint Operations Command." Analysts, Elise said for the first time, not field officers, not teammates. You disregarded rules of engagement. Wilkes barked, I saved people you couldn't reach. You endangered national interests. I buried men you never met because they weren't important enough to extract. A tense silence followed. The judge leaned forward. General Wilkes, did you authorize the deletion of Spectre 12's file? Wilkes opened his mouth, then froze. General, I cannot confirm or deny that, Your Honor. Then I suggest you sit down before I subpoena your entire command structure. Fallout begins by mid-morning. Senator Lyle Crest, ranking member of the Armed Services Committee, issued a public statement. The allegations surrounding Spectre 12 and Captain Mercer are deeply troubling. We will conduct a full Senate inquiry into the matter. The American public deserves answers. That same hour, 3 names tied to Spectre 12's Oversight Committee resigned. The Pentagon issued a no comment. Commander Vell disappeared from public view, but it was already too late. The truth had spread. Elise's emotional reckoning. In the quiet of a break room off the main hallway, Elise sat alone, staring at a half-full paper cup of burnt coffee. She had never expected vindication, only silence. All she had ever wanted was for someone to say, we know what you did, and it mattered. Now the world did know. And yet the ache hadn't faded, because her team wasn't coming back. And Colonel Briggs, the man who kept her sane, alive, real, was still the ground. His death labeled a suicide, his service erased. The door creaked open. Lieutenant Davis entered, holding his briefcase tightly. I'm filing to dismiss the final charge, he said. They've lost control of the narrative. You're walking out of here. Elise didn't look up. You did well, she said quietly. I didn't, but you made it impossible to screw up. He lingered. I looked you up, he said finally, before they wiped it. There was a single photo, a team shot in Jordan. You were standing at the edge. Didn't even look at the camera. That was the point, she said. And for a moment, she let herself remember the laughter, the shared MREs, the impossible choices they made, and the quiet prayers whispered before every drop. She blinked once. Then the steel returned. Public reaction and divisions. Outside, the court steps were now lined with veterans, activists, and reporters. Signs waved in the air. She didn't lie, they did. Honor Widow 7. Accountability for Obsidian. Elise saw it only from a distance, through a side window. Davis pointed. You're a symbol now. I'm not a symbol, she said flatly. I'm a soldier who got left behind. Same difference. The judge's final words. When court resumed, Judge Rayner took his time. His tone was somber, heavy with gravitas. This court has reviewed testimony, verified encrypted data, and confirmed the existence of a covert operations unit known as Spectre 12, under the now uncovered program titled Obsidian Mirror. He looked directly at Elise. You were made to carry out missions without identity, without support, without memory. And when your usefulness expired, they tried to bury you. He paused. This court dismisses all charges with prejudice. The gavel struck. But no one stood. No one clapped. Because it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like the end of a long, cold betrayal. The general who didn't speak. As the courtroom emptied, Elise passed by a man seated in the back corner, alone, in full uniform, for stars on his shoulder. He didn't say a word, but he saluted her as she walked by. Slow, deliberate. She paused, held his gaze, and then nodded once, just once, before walking through the doors and into the storm. 6 days later. Location: Washington, D.C., Capitol Building Subcommittee Room B, 208. Elise Mercer stood alone beneath the cold fluorescent lights of the underground chamber, surrounded by mahogany desks and microphones she hadn't asked to speak into. This wasn't a courtroom. This was far worse. It was Washington. For senators sat across from her behind raised panels, flanked by aides with clipboards and concealed earpieces. 2 wore carefully constructed expressions of sympathy. The 3rd unreadable. The 4th, Senator Alan Shore from Virginia, leaned back with his arms crossed and a smirk that hadn't moved since she entered. C-SPAN cameras were forbidden, but notes were being taken. Everything recorded. Everything transcribed. This wasn't justice. This was containment. For the record, Captain Mercer, began Senator Breland, head of the Armed Services Oversight Committee. Please state your full name, rank, and current military status for the record. Elise Harper Mercer, Captain, United States Army. Formerly assigned to Special Activities Command under Provisional Shadow Program Obsidian Mirror. Current status, honorably suspended, pending reinstatement review. Pending. Shore snorted under his breath. Convenient. Breland didn't flinch. Captain Mercer, he continued, you've claimed that the Spectre 12 program was designed as a deniable asset under Obsidian Mirror, responsible for high-risk operations without official documentation. Is that correct? Yes. Do you believe these missions were approved through legitimate military oversight? No. Then by whose authority were they carried out? Elise stared directly into the senator's eyes. People who never put on a uniform. The buried directive. Elise slid a folder across the table. Inside, 3 pages, recently declassified after Senator Kress intervened with a legal motion. Each page bore a different classified stamp. Operation Seraph, Obsidian Mirror, and one that turned even Senator Shore's smugness into caution. JSOC, NSAD Overlap Authorization. Blackwell Reprisal Initiative. Breland turned pale. This directive was terminated in 2016, he said. These operations were supposed to be absorbed by Allied Joint Command. They weren't, Elise said. They were privatized. You outsourced my team's missions to contractors without accountability. And when we cleaned up their failures, we were erased for being liabilities. She turned to Shore. Do you remember your signature on a funding extension labeled Forward Humanitarian Logistics, Turkey Border? That wasn't food and supplies. That was cover for staging our infiltration into northern Syria. Shore's face hardened. You're out of line, Captain. No, said a voice from the door. Commander Marcus Vell entered, accompanied by 2 men in civilian suits, both former handlers from military intelligence. You are. The testimonies pile in. Vell's appearance was unexpected. He had vanished days ago after courtroom fallout. Many assumed he'd been quietly removed or silenced. Instead, he brought witnesses. Major Leora Chun, a cyber specialist who confirmed that Spectre 12's logs had been manually wiped after the Aleppo mission by someone inside the Pentagon's internet firewall. Captain James Moretti, the only other surviving member of Spectre 12, who had been living under a new identity in the Balkans. Their testimonies were damning. Major Chun opened her tablet and displayed the following string of commands on the overhead monitor. Purge that protocol, Obsidian // Widow 7. Loss confirm. This line, she said, was executed 36 hours after Colonel Briggs's death. It overwrote every file tag to Widow 7 and flagged the remaining data for external audit, not internal. That audit never took place. Senator Breland leaned back, eyes narrowing. Who ordered the purge? Chin hesitated. I can't prove it, but access at that level requires either a direct executive override or a whistleblower inside the National Security Council. The silence that followed was suffocating. Spectre, 12 lives again. Captain Moretti, now grayer, slower, and scarred, took the stand next. I was listed Kia after Fallujah. They buried an empty casket. My parents held a funeral. I watched it from a live stream in a safe house. He looked at Elise. She was the only one who knew I was alive, and the only one who kept sending encrypted check-ins every few months, just to make sure I still had a reason not to disappear. The room was still. What happened to Spectre? 12 wasn't a failure of intel. It was a failure of honor. We didn't break code. We followed it better than the ones who wrote it. The breaking point. That night, the committee meeting ran 3 hours over schedule. By the end, 2 staffers had resigned. Senator Shore walked out mid-session. Outside, protesters had gathered near the steps of the Capitol, holding signs that read, Spectre 12, Heroes Without a Home. Bring them out of the shadows. How many more were buried? One sign had Elisa's courtroom photo beneath the words. She spoke, they panicked. Back in the dark, Elise sat in a black SUV parked outside the memorial wall at Arlington. It was midnight. No press, no eyes, no pity. Across the glass sat Commander Vell. "You know what comes next, right?" he asked quietly. "They'll find a way to spin it," she replied. "Offer me a promotion. Bury the others under medals. Rewrite the history books in grayscale." He nodded. "Probably. And if I refuse, they might just disappear you again." She looked out the window. "You brought Moretti in. You didn't have to. I owed you." Elise finally turned. "Why now?" Vell hesitated, then answered the only way a man like him could. "Because I got tired of surviving in silence." The letter. When she returned to her apartment, Elise found a single envelope slid under her door. Inside, a typed note. "Captain Mercer. Spectre. 12 was never meant to be seen. But you refused to disappear. You refused to stay silent. And because of that, others now know we existed. You weren't erased. You were preserved. We walk without a flag. But we never walk alone. M. There was no signature. No return address. Only a small press insignia. A wolf's head with a broken chain in its mouth. She stared at it for a long time, then tucked it into her boot. The reinstatement offer. The next morning, Elise was summoned to the Pentagon. She expected more grilling, more stonewalling. Instead, she was greeted by a 2-star general, flanked by a quiet aide holding a single file. "We've been instructed," the general said, "to offer full reinstatement with commendation. You'll be posted to Fort Bragg. Instructional command. Quiet life. Clean life. And if I decline, then the file gets sealed again. And you walk free, but silent." She folded her arms. "Why now?" The general sighed. "Because Spectre 12 can't be erased anymore. So we're trying something new." "What's that?" He hesitated. "Recognition." Elise's choice. That night, Elise sat alone on the roof of her apartment, watching planes blink across the sky. She held the reinstatement letter in one hand, the wolf chain insignia in the other. She didn't want command. She didn't want revenge. She just wanted one thing: for the story to stay told. Below her, the city hummed with life. It didn't know about the tunnels in Aleppo, the bodies under rubble, the children saved by ghosts. It didn't know what it meant to walk missions with no badge, no backup, and no hope. But it would, because she would tell it. Fort Meade, 2 weeks later. The auditorium was half-lit, the kind of lighting meant to encourage obedience. Rows of uniformed personnel sat shoulder to shoulder, faces impassive, notepads balanced on knees, pens poised like weapons. Behind the lectern stood a Department of Defense spokesperson, carefully choosing her words as she addressed a restricted-access military assembly. The press was not allowed. Civilian access denied. Only cleared personnel and internal command staff were present. And yet, even here, even now, the fear of what might be said was palpable. After extensive investigation and under executive declassification order, the spokesperson read, "The Department of Defense formally acknowledges the existence of a formerly unconfirmed shadow operations group codenamed Spectre 12, created under the covert umbrella program Obsidian Mirror. Captain Elise Mercer, the final surviving operative assigned to this unit, has been cleared of all wrongdoing. Her record is being amended to reflect her active service." The words landed with a dull thud. No applause, just a shifting of weight. The silent absorption of truth long buried. Behind closed doors, the briefing. After the address, Elise was ushered into a secure conference room. Waiting for her were men and women she had never met but had known by consequence. Deputy undersecretaries, intelligence directors, joint special ops liaisons, all wearing masks of professionalism that had long since hardened into survival instincts. At the head of the table sat General Patrick Norwood, the newly appointed director of special activities. He motioned to the seat across from him. "I'm not going to apologize," he began. "You wouldn't believe it if I did. And I doubt you'd want it." "Correct," Elise said, sitting down. "But you deserve to understand how far this went." He tapped the tablet and swiveled it toward her. On screen, a spiderweb of redacted documents, connected through names, offshore bank accounts, shell companies, and mission logs buried in private contractor repositories. Spectre, 12 wasn't erased because of what it failed to do, Norwood said. It was erased because it succeeded. Elise scrolled, line after line of black ink. So many names. You embarrass a very expensive machine, he continued. Private intelligence, arms deals, foreign policy initiatives, all structured to fail in just the right way to keep the wheels turning. But you broke that cycle. By saving people, Elise said flatly, "Exactly." He leaned forward. "We were never afraid of your weapons, Captain. We were afraid of your example." Public exposure. Senate hearing, open session. 3 days later, Elise was back on Capitol Hill, this time in an open session. Cameras flashed. Reporters leaned forward. Microphones lined the long table before her. The chamber was full. Behind her sat Moretti, Vell, Hannah, and dozens of other allies and veterans, each of them a reminder that this wasn't about redemption for one person. It was about remembrance for all of them. Senator Breland spoke first. "Captain Mercer, you've been called before this committee not just as a soldier, but as a witness to a system that chose silence over service. If you're willing, we'd like to give you the floor." Elise stood. She took a slow breath, and then she began the speech. "I never wanted a microphone," she said. "I never wanted a parade or a commendation. I wanted to serve. And when I was asked to do the impossible, I did it. Not for politics, not for reputation, for the people beside me, for the people we were sent to protect." Her voice did not waver. It cut. We were trained to disappear, to become rumors. We carried no flags. We wore no names. And when we finished what others couldn't, we were buried in silence. She paused. "In Aleppo, I pulled 12 civilians out of a collapsed building. 4 of my team died that night. They never made it home. There were no obituaries, no folded flags, only code names, only scars. The world moved on. But I didn't." Her gaze swept the room. "I didn't speak out because I wanted attention. I spoke out because the ones who stayed quiet the longest were the ones who paid the highest price. Not all shadows deserve to be erased." There was no applause, just silence, deep, heavy, respectful. Aftermath, the blowback. That night, a dozen articles hit national news outlets. Who were the ghosts? Inside Spectre 12's hidden missions. Burned by bureaucracy. The real story of Widow 7. Congress demands oversight after covert unit exposed. The internet erupted. Some called Elise a hero. Others, predictably, a threat to national security. Conspiracy channels ran wild. Congressional hawks demanded tighter control over special operations. Veterans groups issued statements supporting her. But something deeper had shifted. People were talking, not just about Elise, about what had been allowed to happen. Colonel Briggs gets his due. In a quiet ceremony with no cameras allowed, Elise stood beside a new headstone placed at Arlington National Cemetery. The name engraved in clean, sharp letters. Colonel Andrew Briggs. Faithful in silence. Buried in honor. There were no speeches. Just a single folded flag, laid by Elise herself. She reached into her coat and pressed something beneath the corner of the stone, the wolf insignia with the broken chain. A symbol only a few people would ever understand. "I kept the promise," she whispered. "We were heard." Behind her, Vell stood watch. Moretti saluted. Hannah wept. The return offer. Elise received another call from the Pentagon. The voice on the other end belonged to General Norwood again. "We're forming a new advisory council for disavowed assets," he said. "Legal frameworks, memorialization, accountability. I want you on it." Elise stared out the window of her apartment. The skyline washed in gray light. "No more ghosts," she said. "No more," Norwood agreed. Final reckonings. By the end of the week, 3 private military contractors were under investigation. 2 Pentagon officials had resigned. 1 NSC liaison was indicted for falsifying intelligence reports. And a permanent declassification review board was created, the first of its kind. The cracks were spreading. Not fast, not wide, but enough. One last letter. Elise found it taped to her locker at the base gym where she trained. Plain paper. No markings. You didn't just survive Mercer. You made sure we were remembered. That's more than most of us dared to hope for. Widow 3. Tears burned behind her eyes. She didn't let them fall. She just folded the note and placed it beside the medal the Pentagon had mailed her in a padded envelope. Unnamed, unclaimed. She didn't need the citation. She had the truth. The last interview. A month later. Elise sat in front of a single camera. No makeup. No script. No military brass beside her. Just a reporter from a small online publication. Why speak now? The reporter asked. Elise looked at the lens. For the kids who grew up thinking silence was strength, she said. And for the soldiers who thought disappearing was the price of doing something right. Is Widow 7 still active? Elise smiled faintly. No, but she's not gone either. And if they try to bury another team like yours? Her voice didn't change. Then I'll dig them back up. Again. 3 months later. Location: the National Intelligence Memorial Wall, Langley, Virginia. The wall was cold black marble, veined with white. Names etched into its surface disappeared into the shadows at the top. There were no plaques, no bios, just rows and rows of letters. Men and women who had died in secret, their stories swallowed by silence. Elise Mercer stood before it in a dark civilian coat, her rank no longer on display. Her hands were tucked in her pockets, her posture still perfect, but her face softer now, not unguarded, but no longer armored. She scanned the newest additions to the wall. Some she recognized, some she didn't, but all of them mattered. Behind her stood a gathering of a few dozen. Spectre, 12 families, select senators, and former covert operatives. No press, no broadcast, just a private memorial for people who were never meant to exist. At the center of it all was a plaque no larger than a license plate. Engraved into it were only 2 lines. Spectre, 12, the ones who walk without a shadow. The ceremonial silence. General Norwood stepped forward and cleared his throat. We're not here to rewrite history, he began. We're here to uncover it. He turned to Elise, then to the gathered families. We owe our survival to those who were never allowed to be seen. This wall, for too long, was incomplete. Today, it's closer to honest. He stepped back. The silence resumed. Elise approached the new plaque. She didn't touch it. She just stood there, as still as stone, and nodded once, like a soldier reporting in. Then she whispered, "They see you now." Flashback the final mission. There was one mission Elise had never spoken of. Not in court, not to Congress, not to Vell or Moretti, not even to Briggs. It was the one that changed her. Buried outside Homs, Syria. 2020. A chemical weapons depot disguised as a civilian medical transport hub. Her orders were simple: extract intel, exfil, and leave no trace. What she hadn't been told was that the facility housed 12 kidnapped engineers, forced to develop weapons under threat of death to their families. She had 5 minutes to call in airstrike clearance. She used 3 to evacuate them, 2 to hold off the guards. And when the depot exploded, she was still inside the radius. When the medics found her, she was unconscious, both eardrums ruptured, lungs scorched, bleeding from 7 places. No body armor, no backup. The intel survived. The engineer survived. She wasn't supposed to. Present at Briggs' grave. That evening, Elise knelt beside Colonel Briggs' headstone again, this time with nothing in her hands. She had no medals to offer, no words left to give, only her presence. "I thought it would feel bigger than this," she murmured. The vindication, the hearings, the headlines. She brushed a leaf from the base of the stone. But I still hear them at night. Not the ones we lost, the ones we left behind. She paused. They're asking if it was worth it. A voice behind her answered. It was. Elise turned to see Commander Vell, wearing a gray overcoat, his features older, his eyes red-rimmed. "I didn't know you were coming," she said. "I almost didn't." They stood together in silence, side by side. Then Vell said, There's a foundation now for families of disavowed operatives. Specter's families were the first recipients. We're calling it the Briggs Initiative. Elise's jaw tightened. You'd hate that, she said, smiling faintly. He'd demand it be renamed after you. Then he'd assign me paperwork until I cried. Vel laughed, for the first time in years. The final offer. Weeks later, Elise was summoned one last time to the Pentagon. This time, she was led into a small conference room with just two people inside, General Norwood and an older woman with a titanium cane and half-missing fingers, Director Maureen Glass, the last living architect of Obsidian Mirror. Elise, the general said carefully, there's something we need to ask. Elise raised an eyebrow. Glass took over. We are disbanding the last of the old protocol programs, but we're building something new. Transparent, accountable, and limited. But we need someone who understands what these programs were, what they cost, what they broke. She leaned forward. We want you to lead it. Elise stared at her. You want me to be the watchdog for ghosts? No, Glass said. We want you to make sure there are no more ghosts. The classroom. Elise didn't take the job. She took another one. Instructional command. Fort Bragg. She entered the classroom on the first day, wearing civilian clothes. A faded black shirt, tactical boots. Her name tag on the board simply read, Instructor Mercer. 24 candidates sat before her, young, eager, confident. She stood in silence for a long moment, then finally said, You want to be special operations? Here's the first truth. There are things you'll be asked to do that no one will thank you for. Things that won't make the news. Won't earn you a medal. Won't even be believed. She looked each of them in the eye. The question isn't whether you can complete the mission. The question is whether you can live with being erased by it. The room was silent. She smiled faintly. Good. Now we can begin. Legacy. 1 month later, a bronze statue was quietly installed at a decommissioned forward operating base overseas. It depicted 6 soldiers, weapons at rest, heads bowed. No names. No dates. Just a single engraving. Spectre, 12, gone but never forgotten. Elise never visited it. She didn't need to, but she did receive one final package. Inside, a dog tag. It had no name, only a serial number she hadn't seen in years. W7-1478. Taped to the tag was a single note, in case they try to rewrite it again. V. Closing scene. The interview that changed everything. In a quiet podcast interview, one that would later go viral, quoted by soldiers, intelligence officers, and whistleblowers alike, Elise was asked one final question. What would you say to the people who tried to erase you? She took a moment, then leaned into the mic. You failed. If you like this story, please subscribe to support this channel.